I'm Nora, 32, and if you told me a few years ago I'd be standing in my own Seattle apartment, keys in hand, with a life I built from scratch, I'd have laughed. Not because it was impossible, but because I spent so long feeling like the odd one out, the black sheep of my family, always chasing a spotlight that never turned my way. Growing up in a fancy suburb just outside Seattle, I was the oldest kid of two cardiologists, my mom and dad, big names in their field, with a house full of awards and egos to match. But their pride? That was reserved for my younger twin brothers, Thomas and Mason. From the moment those two showed up, it was like I faded into the wallpaper. It started small. I'd be 6, sitting at the kitchen table, watching Thomas and Mason get the bigger slices of birthday cake, their plates piled high with frosting while I got the crumbly edge piece. By the time I was 10, it was new bikes for them, shiny and sleek, while I was still wobbling on my hand-me-down with a squeaky chain. I didn't get it then, why my parents' eyes lit up for them, but barely flickered for me. I'd lie awake at night, wondering what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't enough. The first time I realized I could be something more was at the Seattle Art Museum. I was maybe 11, tagging along on a school trip, when I saw a restorer working on an old painting. She was brushing away years of grime, bringing back colors so vivid they made my heart skip. I was hooked. I'd spend hours sketching in my room, dreaming of fixing broken art, making forgotten things beautiful again. I told my parents I wanted an art kit, not some fancy set, just paints and brushes to practice with. My 12th birthday rolled around, and I tore open my gift, heart pounding, only to find a math workbook. "It's practical, Nora," my mom said, barely looking up from her medical charts. "Art's a hobby, not a future." Thomas smirked across the table, unwrapping his new gaming console. I swallowed the lump in my throat and shoved the workbook under my bed. By my teens, the favoritism was impossible to ignore. Family vacations were all about what the twins wanted. If Thomas was into kayaking, we'd be out on Puget Sound before I could blink. If Mason wanted to hike, we'd be trekking up Mount Rainier, my suggestions for an art gallery trip brushed off like lint. I'd sit in the back seat, sketching in my notebook, pretending I didn't care. But I did. Every time my parents cheered at Thomas's soccer games or bragged about Mason's debate wins, I felt smaller, like I was shrinking into someone they didn't even see. The only person who really saw me was my Grandma Rose. She lived in a cozy cottage in Olympia, filled with books and old records, and she'd let me ramble about art for hours. One afternoon, when I was 14, she handed me a small box. Inside was a modest art kit, paints, brushes, a sketch pad. "You've got a gift, Nora," she said, her eyes warm. "Don't let anyone tell you it's not enough." I hugged her so tight, I thought I'd never let go. That kit became my lifeline, something to hold on to when my parents' indifference stung too much. High school was a battle. I threw myself into art classes, staying late to work on projects, while Thomas and Mason were shipped off to private academies, their tuition covered without a second thought. I went to public school, scraping by on secondhand textbooks. When I started applying to colleges, I set my sights on art restoration programs. I'd spend weekends at the museum, peppering the staff with questions about preserving old canvases. The day I told my parents I wanted to study art restoration, my mom laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. "Nora, that's not a career. Be serious." My dad didn't even look up from his laptop. Thomas, lounging on the couch, grinned. "Yeah, Nora, why not do something real, like medicine?" I saw the pride in my parents' faces when he said that, a pride they'd never shown me. It hurt, but it also lit a fire. I wasn't going to let them dim my dreams. When my college acceptance letter came, I was over the moon. I'd earned a scholarship to a state university in Washington for art restoration. I ran into the living room, waving the letter like a flag.
"Mom, Dad."
I got in. My mom glanced up from her coffee. "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Thomas and Mason ace their AP exams?" I stood there, letter trembling in my hand, feeling like I'd been punched. They didn't even ask about my program. That night, I cried into my pillow, but I promised myself I'd prove them wrong. I'd make it, with or without them. The day I left for college, I packed my beat-up suitcase with thrift store clothes and my old laptop, ready to catch a bus to campus. My parents were too busy with their hospital schedules to drive me, not that I expected them to. I stood at the curb, nerves buzzing, when Grandma Rose's old hatchback pulled up. She stepped out, her silver hair catching the morning light, and wrapped me in a hug. "Nora, my girl," she whispered, slipping an envelope into my hand. "You're going to shine." Inside was a check, not life-changing, but enough to cover my first semester's books. More than the money, her belief in me felt like armor against the world. College was freedom and struggle rolled into one. For the first time, I wasn't living in Thomas and Mason's shadow. I could dive into art restoration classes, learning how to clean centuries-old paintings and repair cracked frames, without someone telling me it was a waste of time. But money was tight. My scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, rent, food, supplies, came from late-night shifts at a campus coffee shop. I'd hear about my brothers' lives through reluctant family calls, Ivy League dorms, spring break trips to Hawaii, internships at top hospitals, all bankrolled by mom and dad. Meanwhile, I was rationing instant noodles and praying my laptop wouldn't die mid-project. Art restoration became my sanctuary. There was something magical about peeling back layers of grime to reveal a painting's hidden colors, like giving it a second chance at life. I'd lose myself in the work, forgetting the sting of my parents' indifference. In my junior year, I landed an internship at a small Seattle museum. It wasn't glamorous, mostly cataloging dusty artifacts and sweeping floors, but it felt like a foot in the door. I called home to share the news, my voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, I got an internship at the museum." Her response was flat. "That's nice, Nora. Did you know Mason's presenting at a medical conference next month?" I gripped the phone, swallowing the urge to scream. Instead, I muttered, "That's great," and hung up, staring at the cracked ceiling of my dorm. That spark of defiance I'd felt as a kid was growing, whispering that I didn't need their approval to keep going. Grandma Rose was my lifeline through those years. She'd send letters with little updates about her garden or her latest book club drama, always slipping in a few bucks or a heartfelt note. "You're doing what you love, Nora. That's more than most can say." Her words kept me grounded when I felt like I was drowning. By my final year, I was working on a real restoration project, a faded landscape painting from the 1800s. I'd spend hours in the studio, coaxing its colors back to life, feeling like I was uncovering a piece of myself with every brushstroke. When I told my parents about it, hoping for a flicker of interest, my dad just said, "Sounds like a lot of work for not much pay." I didn't bother calling home after that. Graduation was bittersweet. I walked across the stage, clutching my diploma, scanning the crowd for my family. They were there, but it felt like they'd rather be anywhere else. At dinner afterward, at some generic chain restaurant, my dad barely looked up from his menu. "So, Nora, what's next?" I sat up straight, trying to sound confident. "I got a job offer from a museum in Seattle. It's entry-level, but it's a start." He frowned. "Seattle's expensive. How much does it pay?" I mumbled the modest salary, and their faces said it all. Disappointment, like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. Thomas and Mason, meanwhile, were already lined up for med school, their paths paved with mom and dad's money and connections. I left that dinner feeling small, but Grandma Rose caught me outside. "Don't let them dull your spark," she said, pressing another envelope into my hand. It was just enough for a deposit on a tiny Seattle apartment. I hugged her, tears prickling, and promised myself I'd make it work. Seattle felt like a fresh start. My museum job was grunt work, cleaning frames, logging inventory, but every day I was surrounded by art, and that was enough. Then I met Lucas. He was a web designer, hustling to build his own business, with a warm smile and a knack for making me laugh. We met at a coffee shop during a rare break, bonding over our love for creating something from nothing, him with code, me with paint. Lucas got it, the struggle of chasing a dream no one else believed in. He'd grown up in Tacoma, raised by parents who worked long hours at a shipyard, teaching him to fight for every opportunity. We were underdogs, and that made us unstoppable together. After a year of dating, I brought Lucas home to meet my family. Big mistake. We sat in their pristine dining room, the air thick with tension. My dad leaned forward, trying to sound casual, but missing by a mile. So, Lucas, what's your 5-year plan? Lucas shifted, his hand finding mine under the table. I'm building my client list. It's slow, but I'm getting there. My mom jumped in, her voice sharp. And your income, can it support a family? I felt my face burn. Mom, that's not. Lucas squeezed my hand. It's okay, Nora. I'm not where I want to be yet, Dr. Torres, but I'm working hard. The questions kept coming, each one a jab at his dreams, his worth. By the end of dinner, I was seething, and Lucas's usual spark was dimmer. As we left, my mom pulled me aside. Nora, you need to be practical. You've chosen a tough career. Don't tie yourself to someone who's going nowhere. I stared at her. The words I wanted to scream stuck in my throat. Lucas wasn't the problem, they were. When Lucas and I got engaged, we knew our wedding would be simple. Our savings were barely enough for a small ceremony at a community center with wildflowers and a homemade cake. I swallowed my pride and called my parents, hoping they'd want to be part of it. Mom, Dad, we set a date for the wedding. It's nothing fancy, but maybe you could help with something small? The silence was deafening. Finally, my mom said, Nora, you're an adult. If you chose this path, you handle it. I hung up, tears stinging, but not surprised. Grandma Rose, as always, came through. I can't give you a fairy tale wedding, she said over the phone, but I want your day to be special. She sent a check, small, but enough for a few extras like fairy lights and a second-hand dress that made me feel beautiful. The wedding was perfect in its own way. Our friends pitched in, stringing lights and baking cupcakes. As I walked down the aisle, a path of scattered petals, Lucas's smile lit up the room, and for a moment, I forgot everything else. My parents showed up, but their stiff postures and bored expressions screamed disapproval. I overheard my mom muttering to my dad about the cheap decorations, and Thomas and Mason spent the night in a corner, snickering at their phones. I focused on Lucas, our vows, and the friends who made it magical. But the next morning, my phone lit up with notifications. Thomas and Mason had posted photos from the wedding on social media, with captions that cut like knives. Congrats to our big sis on her budget bash, next to a blurry shot of our cake, and dollar store vibes for Nora's big day, beside our fairy lights. The worst was a side-by-side of our buffet and a fancy restaurant meal, captioned, Nora's wedding versus our usual lunch. Guess which is which? The comments were brutal, some relatives laughing along, others, like Aunt Betty, calling it cruel. My parents' response? A breezy boys will be boys. I didn't call them. I didn't yell. I just blocked them and decided I was done. 5 months later, the annual Torres family reunion loomed. Lucas thought we should go, hoping it might smooth things over. I wasn't so sure, but I agreed, thinking maybe, just maybe, things could change. We walked into the Seattle hotel ballroom, the air buzzing with cousins and aunts I barely knew. I made small talk, avoiding my parents and brothers, but the tension was like a storm cloud. Then I overheard Thomas bragging about his latest ski trip to Whistler, paid for by Mom and Dad, and something in me snapped. I stepped forward, voice steady but loud. Must be nice, Thomas, having Mom and Dad bankroll your whole life. The room froze. Thomas blinked, caught off guard. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't back down, years of hurt pouring out. You and Mason get everything, private schools, new cars, $700,000 for your fancy degrees.
Me?
I got a math workbook for my birthday and $100 for my wedding while you got a fortune. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mom's face turned red. Nora, you're being dramatic. We've always treated you equally. I laughed, bitter and loud. Equal? I went to public school while they got private tutors. I scraped by on scholarships while you paid for their Ivy League lives. Don't tell me that's equal. My dad stepped in, voice low. You're embarrassing yourself, Nora. But I wasn't done. No, you're embarrassing yourselves, pretending this is fair. Grandma Rose's voice cut through the chaos. Enough. She stood, her small frame radiating authority. I've watched this family tear Nora down for years, and I'm ashamed. You've favored Thomas and Mason, and it's breaking us apart. My parents sputtered, but the room was with her, cousins nodding, and Betty's eyes soft with sympathy. Thomas and Mason just smirked, like it was all a joke. I grabbed Lucas's hand and walked out, my heart pounding but lighter than it had been in years. Months later, Lucas's hard work paid off. His design firm landed a huge contract with a tech startup, and suddenly, we weren't just scraping by. We bought a cozy apartment in Capitol Hill, with big windows and space for my art supplies. I was thrilled, but the past wasn't done with us. One evening, as I was setting up for a dinner with Grandma Rose, someone pounded on our door. Before I could react, Thomas and Mason stormed in, faces twisted with rage. "You manipulative little," Thomas started, jabbing a finger at me. "We saw your social media post, flaunting this place with Grandma. You think we don't know you're cozying up to her for her money?" I was stunned. "You think Grandma bought this?" "Lucas, and I earned every penny." Mason laughed, cruel and sharp. "Sure you did. Where's the old lady? Hiding so we can't talk sense into her? Can't wait for her to croak, so we can sell her house." A soft gasp stopped us cold. Grandma Rose stood in the guest room doorway, her face pale. "So that's how you feel," she said, voice steady but laced with pain. "I'm just a paycheck to you." Thomas stammered, but she raised a hand. "I've heard enough. I know who values me now." I turned to my brothers, anger giving me strength. "Get out.
Now."
They slunk away, muttering excuses, but the damage was done. Grandma Rose hugged me, her hands shaking, and I knew we'd both crossed a line we couldn't uncross. The days after that night were a whirlwind. My phone buzzed with calls and texts, my parents, desperate to fix things. I answered once, against my better judgment. "Nora, you need to talk to your grandmother," my mom said, her voice sharp. The boys didn't mean it. They're upset. I laughed, cold and final. Upset that we bought our own apartment? That Grandma loves me? They broke into my home and wished her dead. There's no fixing that. My dad jumped in, his tone softer but no less manipulative. "Think of the family, Nora. Your brothers deserve her support." That was it. Deserve? I snapped. "After years of you ignoring me, belittling Lucas, and excusing their cruelty, I'm done with your guilt trips." I hung up, blocked their numbers, and felt a weight lift. It hurt, like cutting out a bruise, but it was necessary. Lucas was my anchor. He held me when I cried, celebrated our wins, and never once blamed me for the chaos. Grandma Rose moved closer, spending more time with us in Seattle, her laughter filling our apartment. Aunt Betty, who'd reached out after the wedding posts, became a regular visitor, bringing books and stories from her Portland shop. Other relatives, cousins, uncles, sent messages of support, some apologizing for not seeing the favoritism sooner. It was like a fog had cleared, revealing a family I could actually belong to. Our apartment became our sanctuary. Every painting on the wall, every thrift store chair, was a piece of the life we'd built. One evening, as I chopped vegetables for our first big dinner with Grandma Rose and Aunt Betty, Lucas snapped a photo of us laughing. I posted it online, alongside a shot of our new keys captioning it, "New home, true family. Grateful for those who've been there through it all." As I hit post, I felt free, not just from my family's toxicity, but from the need to prove myself to them. This was my life, my love, my home. That night, as we sat around the table, plates piled with pasta and stories, I looked at Lucas, Grandma Rose, and Aunt Betty, and my heart felt full. We'd fought for this, against every doubt and dig, and we'd won. The soft Seattle rain tapped the windows, but inside, it was warm, bright, and ours. To everyone who's followed this journey, thank you. You've walked with me through rejection, rage, and redemption. If my story hit you, hit that subscribe button and join us, where every brushstroke tells a tale of grit, love, and starting over. Keep painting your own path, and I'll see you at the canvas.